This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
What do I want to talk about? I know what we eventually have to talk about. Since it is the Friday show, we've got all the AEW news to run down, including their newest weekly installment of Anti-Elite Wrestling, where the locker room continues to prove that there is almost zero unity amongst any of the ranks. And the only elite members of the roster are the ego-driven dirtbags that are going to wind up being this company's ultimate downfall. So welcome to the show. Sorry, didn't mean to get off to a rough start. But this AEW stuff, it's truly something to behold. It is really like reliving the WCW demise all over again. Except this stuff is hitting a lot faster and more frequently, it seems like. You know, the birth of the internet really did a number on the wrestling business, I'll tell you that. You know, meanwhile, I've just been sitting here for the better part of 3 years waiting for AEW to figure out what they want their identity to be. You know, they keep saying they're real professional wrestling, yet somehow I sit here in 2022 still questioning that. Call me a skeptic. And before we start tearing into all that material, if you are new to the FSWR channel, make sure you subscribe, like the show, leave a comment, and make sure to stop back every Monday and Friday for new material. We are on YouTube and Rumble each week. And for the Friday podcast today, we've also got the continuation of our retro review series, which we will get to shortly, but got some AEW coverage we need to get out of the way first. And I'm not just talking about the TV show. You know, sometimes I wonder if I'm watching a wrestling product with AEW or an episode of Degrassi. God, the middle school drama stories with this company. They just keep coming and coming and coming and coming. The years stop coming and they don't stop coming and they don't stop coming and they don't stop coming. Am I right? You know, dude, at this point, all I can just do is laugh about it. You know, especially when the stories are coming from complete wastes of anatomy that are still on this roster. That's a trigger warning for anyone out there that's actually a fan of Sammy Guevara or Andrade. And look, I'm not going to harp on it for too long because it honestly doesn't seem like it's breaking any new grounds when it comes to talking about AEW's ongoing backstage issues. Just tally it in the grown adults acting like grade school children column. This is our future generation, man. This is what we're dealing with. A bunch of self-entitled, pestering men and women acting like kids in a professional working environment. And we got the education system and social media to blame for that. Am I all that surprised by it? No. Am I surprised that Tony Khan is still continuing to let this crap fester? No, not really. I'm just a fly on the wall watching it boil over week in and week out while Tony continues to let the inmates run his own asylum. I've said it time and time again that Tony Khan just is not bred for this job. He is not a good authority figure, in or out of kayfabe. He's just way too weak and feeble continuing to try and be everyone's friend instead of being a boss. And until we see the boss actually put his foot down and hit some of the boys with real reprimands, most notably the ones that are causing blatant problems behind the scenes, this stuff will continue to happen because Tony allows it to happen. And that's on him. So I have nothing else to add to the whole Andrade Sammy thing that already hasn't been touched on. And for the record, no, real reprimands do not count as giving Sammy Guevara a pinfall victory in your Dynamite main event. Dumbass. Speaking of Dynamite, I almost had completely forgotten this was AEW's 3-year anniversary show. The more things change, the more they stay the same, am I right? Actually, I can probably make the valid argument that things are looking pretty bleak right now if we're comparing arena size from 3 years ago to now. Could they have made it any clearer how small that crowd was this week? I don't know what building they were running in the DC area, but God, that crowd size. Brutal. You know, and that kind of ties into another one of AEW's issues at the moment right now, pertaining to ticket sales, because they have not been doing too hot in that avenue lately. I mean, we've all been alluding to it. The whole honeymoon period with AEW being over, and now people are finally waking up to the reality of the product that's being presented in front of them. You know, but the ticket sales are troubling for a whole other reason, because the people that are buying those tickets, those are not the casual fans that are watching that television show every week. The people buying the tickets are the core hardcore AEW fans. And we've talked forever now how AEW has basically cemented themselves as a niche product for the hardcore wrestling market, whatever's left of them in 2022. And now even those people aren't buying tickets. You know, and there are other things to take into account. Obviously, with the way the economy is right now and inflation, you know, the jacking of ticket prices aren't doing AEW any favors. But the main thing that you can equate the failure to is the fact that when you run the same cities and venues over and over again like AEW has for the last 3 years, the flavor's going to start to wear off after a while. You know, the great thing for AEW when it first started was that there were so many disgruntled WWE fans that were looking for a real alternative for so long. AEW could get away with running those big buildings in places like Philly or Chicago or New York over and over because those people are going to come back to support the company no matter what. Booking logic or coherent storytelling be damned. They didn't care. But, you know, after 3 years of riding that same carousel where it's the same venues and the same cities in front of generally the same people over and over and over again, you know, when you tie that in with the fact that the honeymoon period with AEW is long since past the expiration date, now we're starting to see the real effects of that. Now that Vince is gone, AEW fans are simultaneously peering over to what's going on in WWE right now, and how Triple H is sort of manning the fort from a creative standpoint. You know, it's also important to remember that AEW's current fan base are the same people that supported and loved the old NXT model from several years ago. Run and booked by whom? Triple H. So there's curiosity. There's intrigue. I'm sure the tides will turn eventually. They always do. I still think people severely overrate the old NXT model to begin with. You know, as great as some of the old takeover shows were, booking and show structure was not one of Hunter's strong points. Let's not forget that. Like, go back and watch some of those old NXT episodes, people. They weren't particularly great shows every week. You know, and the SmackDown shows we've been reviewing haven't really blown the roof off the joint, if you know what I mean there. But AEW ticket sales, we'll see. You know, right now it's not a good reflection on the company, and I'm not really sure how you fix it unless Tony would be willing to branch out to some of those other markets to try and attract new eyeballs. You know, running some towns outside the key big cities would be a fresh start because At least it would be a new experience for anyone that hasn't already gotten the chance to see AEW live and in person. But we're long past the point where people are going to keep flying in from all across the country just to see an episode of Dynamite live. AEW needs to actually broaden their scope now. Get out of Chicago. Get out of New York. Get out of Atlanta. Get out of the big cities. Yes, there's going to be heavy traffic in the big cities, but right now, those places aren't selling well because you've beaten that horse to death. And like I noted with the show earlier, especially with the way it was filmed this week, you could visually see from someone watching at home how small that arena size was. And if that's something that ends up kind of being captured from week to week, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. But, using the ticket sales as an example to try and model how little buzz there seems to be with AEW at the moment, you could kind of use this show as a model. Because I wouldn't say it was a bad show necessarily, but I don't know. Like, I'm watching it, and with the exception of one, maybe two segments, generally I thought the show was just boring. There were long stretches here where I was tuning stuff in and out, not really paying that close attention, just kind of watching and not really finding myself invested in anything, be it good or bad material. At least they opened with a good segment. Moderately good. Mainly thanks to MJF. They opened with him and Flat Wheel Yuta, who every time I see him, I just start naming off like 5 other guys I would rather see on the show every week instead. We're lucky to ever see guys like FTR booked in a match, or maybe a better example would be guys like Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs, both of whom weren't even booked on the show, period. But goddamn, we go 1 week without seeing Wheeler fucking Yuta on this show. May as well just shut the company down now. How will we ever survive? At least after 3 years, we've been able to establish that MJF is still the best worker in the company, bar none. But even by MJF standards, I wouldn't say the match was anything to write home about. Definitely not anything you really need to go out of your way to see. Again, it kind of cycles back to what I was saying earlier. There were parts of the show where I just found myself blanking out while something was going on. And I hate to say that about an MJF match, especially because we rarely ever see the guy wrestle to begin with. But I said it before, I really don't care about MJF feuding with Wheeler Yuta, even as a placeholder program. It's not really doing much for Max. Yuta's as over as the guy's ever going to get in his entire career. He's over with the marks, and that's about the cutoff point as far as I'm concerned. He's never going to get over to a national mainstream audience, no matter how much Tony forces the guy down everyone's throats like Randy Orton circa mid-2000. Generally, the wrestling was fine. MJF is a smart worker and he knows what he's doing. Yuta's a good athlete, so the layout of the match was fine. Yeah, the stuff at the end where they were going back and forth with the pin reversals was kind of wacky. If only because it was totally obvious that Bryce Remsburg was just counting falls without even checking to see whether or not the guy's shoulders were pinned to the mat. But generally, it just looked way too choreographed for my liking. I liked MJF's modification he did with the Salt to the Earth armbar. Kind of looked like that old finish that Ciampa used to use in NXT. But that's really the only input I have regarding the match. The afterbirth part was one of those unfortunate reality checks that sometimes when you have an angle planned, if the crowd's not warming up to it or they're just sitting on their hands kind of watching and not really reacting to anything, makes it really kind of awkward as a viewer at home watching, because they have you to try and shake MJF's hand afterwards, and, MJF selling that he's unsure about it, because apparently Yuta and MJF have a 6-month history or something together for work they did outside AEW. Would have been nice to maybe know that, before they rang the fucking bell for the match. instead of telling us in the afterbirth when no one could possibly care at that point. And of course, they have Malcolm Bivens and Lee Moriarty's green hair run out and jump Yuta from behind. And MJF's going off on Bivens, telling him that he didn't call for backup. So literally, they put this group together like 3 weeks ago with the selling point being that MJF is working hand in hand with them as a support system. Now they're already teasing dissension because Tony Khan can't control his ADHD. But it's like, they're trying to build this angle here where MJF is on the fence with whether or not he's okay with laying out Yuta. I think in their minds, they were probably expecting a large portion of the crowd to start an MJF chant. Instead, it just kind of turned into one of those TNA moments where the people are just sitting around either smiling or doing the old droning boo noise. The whole thing just comes off so Bush League. And by the way, the whole thing with William Regal coming down with brass knucks and making MJF stand down to him, I mean, fine. I get MJF's a heel, even though it's absurd to think MJF wouldn't be able to drop Regal with one blow. I'm more so hung up on the idea that Regal just happened to have a pair of brass knuckles in his pocket for this segment. Just one of those nitpicky details. Overall, though, match was fine. I'll always be engaged with MJF's storylines. But the way they've handled his return to television post All Out has been pretty lame, if I'm being honest. One may say it's mid at best. After that, we had this Darby Allin Jay Lethal match. I don't even recall the last time I saw Darby wrestle on Dynamite. I know he was involved in that whole hardcore fuckery on Rampage where they nearly killed poor Julia Hart. Again, the wrestling was fine here. I like the deal where Jay cut off Darby by clipping his knee early on after Darby took a great leapfrog, nearly killing Paul Turner in the process. One of those deals where Darby came so precariously close to bumping Turner, I almost assumed it was actually inadvertent because normally ref bumps look totally contrived as all get out. This one was almost too perfectly timed. Like I said, everything they did was fine. I just don't have much else to say about it because it was a cold match with no real backstory. Darby's booking has been on and off for so long now, it's impossible for me to really care at this point. And I was never all that high on him to begin with. Lethal hasn't meant a damn thing since he showed up. So it's like, okay, Darby beat Jay Lethal. Who cares? It's not like Lethal ever wins a match anyway, so what does it mean at the end of the day? I guess my only other gripe about it is that it was the second match in a row where they had to do the post-match handshake deal. Now, granted, Lethal at least got to shake Darby's hand this time, but still, they probably could have done without that whole thing. Or, if they had to do the Lethal handshake to further along his eventual split from Sanjay and Great Khali 2.0, I never forget that guy's name. Maybe they could have rethought the way they booked the fallout to the MJF Yuta match so Yuta didn't have to initiate the handshake. Again, just one of those formatting structure things that kind of bugs me, but I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one. So then, completely at random, for no reason, speaking of dudes I have not seen on this program in Lord knows how long, Brian Cage wrestled. Yeah, remember that dude? I sure didn't. I thought they canned that guy a long time ago. But no, here he is. Still sucking a paycheck out of Cocaine Con. And not only did Cage wrestle, but by not wrestling on this program in well over a year, he somehow earned himself a TNT championship match. Your guess is as good as mine on that one. And there were plenty of other problems with this beyond the fact that Brian Cage is getting a title shot after having not wrestled on this show in well over a year. And the thing that sucks is Wardlow is a guy that I do want to see them push and feature on television every week. Problem is that he shouldn't be booked in matches with guys that are either his size or, in the case of Cage, more impressive looking from a genetic standpoint. All this did visually was make Wardlow look smaller than Brian Cage because Cage is built physically better than Wardlow is. He's got bigger arms, broader shoulders, a better V-taper. Now, if the goal was to get Cage over as the more physical specimen, then fine, you can book this. But the problem is that Cage was not the guy they were trying to get over here. So I don't know why they booked Wardlow against another big guy that looked more physically intimidating than him. That did him no favors. I also still don't understand the psychology of giant men using lucha spots as standard offense. Probably the biggest reason I've never been all that big on Brian Cage. I mean, I get he can do the tiger feint kick, but does that necessarily mean he has to? It's not to single out Cage because Wardlow is still doing that top rope senton that I think is completely gratuitous. I don't know. Again, the segment didn't do a whole lot for me. Wardlow won with a series of power bombs. Went way too long. It was two green, muscly guys having a choppy indie match wherein the people really didn't get into it until Wardlow started doing the power bombs. Which again, as we've established now, it's the only thing that they really care about. So why they feel the need to book Wardlow in longer TV matches, I'll never know. But, I mean, Tony doesn't know what he's doing either, so I'm not all that surprised by it. And by the way, the Afterbirth deal with all the run-ins and beatdowns. A, I had no idea who any of the affiliates are in Prince Nana's faction aside from Brian Cage, nor do I care. B, I also don't care about Wardlow and Samoa Joe teaming together. And C, FTR mean absolutely nothing on this show right now, and having them serve as the backup babyface team to another babyface tag team is also not doing them any favors. We had a girls' match next, which was followed by a scissoring session with the Acclaimed, not the girls. Boy, we can only wish. I really don't even know what to say about this monstrosity. If we can even call it that. Well, I guess we can just start from the beginning. So it is National Scissoring Day. Because if we can all make up random holidays throughout the year for no discernible reason, why not tack on another yearly celebration? And if there's one thing Anthony Bowens knows a lot about, it's scissoring. Because, Anyway, so I kind of had a love-hate relationship with this segment. On the one hand, it is a total WWE comedy segment, and after last week's garbage segment with the Jag-Off Asshole Society sponsored by Chris Jericho, the last thing I wanted to see on this show was another one of those kinds of segments. But on the other hand, got to admit, this is also pretty fucking hilarious at certain parts. It also helps that the Acclaimed are actually over. And the people were totally into this thing from pretty much start to finish. Bowens did probably the best promo of his entire career. Like, you could tell these guys were having fun out there. Everyone was flashing the scissor signs. The fans all had the gimmicks and everything. Probably my favorite part of the whole thing was when Caster had everyone give the sign of peace to their neighbor in the crowd, and all the fans began scissoring one another. By the way, everything I'm saying right now can be taken out of context in one way or another, and that is totally fine because the shit is actually kind of funny. And I think Caster perfectly encapsulated the first part of the segment with the following quote. Tonight, this is not about right versus left. It is not about red versus blue. Right now, the country is divided, but if there is one thing that is universal, everyone loves the Acclaimed. Word. So unfortunately, the segment continued following the whole scissor celebration, because out comes Sneaky Swerve, as Bowens referred to him as in his promo, the party pooper. And long story short with the whole deal, Swerve basically sets the stage for his match with Billy Gunn next week, since Billy was the one that helped the Acclaim win the belts to begin with. By the way, this is probably like the third or fourth occasion where they've done one of these segments where Keith Lee and Swerve were not coming out together as a team. Is that part of some underlying story that I'm missing, or am I just looking way too into it? Because it seems like one week Keith Lee will be out there doing a promo on the Acclaimed, but then the next week Swerve will be out there by himself doing a promo, but Keith and Swerve are never in the same room at the same time. I don't get it. I mean, I know they've been going on and off with teasing dissension with one another, but I mean, God, they put stuff off for so long. It's like, do you really even care about it at this point? But by far, this was the best part of the entire show, minus the Swerve stuff at the end. I mean, he kind of dragged everything down a little bit. But the actual scissoring part with the group was pretty damn great. I have no confidence that Tony will capitalize on any of this momentum, but we'll enjoy it while it lasts because we all know it'll die out eventually. Again, call me a skeptic, but I mean, how many times have we been down this road with guys that are extremely over and Tony just doesn't capitalize on their momentum and the fans stop giving a crap? Happens all the time. But anyway, super entertaining segment. The right kind of sports entertainment. It was not as entertaining as Roosh versus Adam Page. I am not bullshitting you. The very first fucking thing these idiots do, within literal seconds of the opening bell, they immediately charge one another and go right to the fake forearm and chop exchanges. It's like clockwork, man. This show is either professional wrestling or amateur indie hour at the local outlaw bar. I couldn't believe it. Took them less than 10 whole seconds, and they immediately go right to the phony, fake indie looking garbage. But, oh, I forgot though. Hangman Page doesn't take advice from any of the experts because he knows what he's doing. Dickwad. So immediately following that, I walked away from the TV to do something. I left it on in the background, but I wasn't actively paying attention. I periodically checked back after the commercial to see what was going on, see if the guys decided to act like professionals instead of untrained indie fucksticks. You'll be pleasantly surprised when I tell you they didn't work like pros at any other point. They did about 1 million back and forth moves, and finally at the end, Roosh hit Page with a straightjacket pile driver, wherein about a minute later, if that, Page sprang back up to his feet from out of the corner, decked Roosh with a clothesline, and then ran out to the apron to hit his buckshot lariat on Roosh for the pin. Because, you know, selling, that's not a thing, apparently. Because Page doesn't need to take advice from anybody. So fuck that segment. Then Luchasaurus killed the fake luchador from Mobile, Alabama in about 15 seconds, wherein they followed that with Jungle Boy running out with a chair to stop the attempted post-match heat angle. Talk about the epitome of lazy booking. Seriously, it's every damn AEW segment on this show. Match, afterbirth attack, someone runs out to make the save. It's so uncreative and lazy, it's not even funny. It's like Jungle Boy is instinctually supposed to know that Christian and Luchasaurus are going to attack the guy after the bell so he can run down. Theme music playing and all. Because I guess he talks with the sound guy before he runs out too. And of course, to make the visual look even more stupid, Jungle Boy runs off the heels with a chair by himself, and while they're standing outside the ring, no less than 10 feet away from Jungle Boy who is in the ring, instead of Jungle Boy running after them with the chair, he stands in the ring and cuts a promo, saying that he's going to break and destroy the dinosaur for turning on him. Meanwhile, motherfucker's standing like inches away from the ring the entire time Jungle Boy's ranting to him. Like there's this giant invisible force field up, preventing Jungle Boy from leaving the ring and beating the shit out of these guys. So stupid. Wasn't it Cody that did that promo a couple years ago, poking fun at the idea that wrestlers were incapable of chasing after the heels when the face was in the ring and the heels are on the floor? Like, we're supposed to pretend the babyface is incapable of just exiting the ring and running after the heels because there's this invisible barrier preventing the two from going after the other? God almighty. I don't know. Don't mind me, just sitting over here yelling at the clouds like normal. And our main event was Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara versus Daniel Garcia and Bryan Danielson. God, another main event for Garcia. Tony just can't get himself enough of that guy. Him and Flat Wheel Yuta. These two might honestly go down as the two biggest WTF pushes in AEW history when it finally goes out of business. In fact, when I write my book on why AEW failed, the front cover will literally just be side-by-side photos of Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Yuta. That is all you need to know right there. The whole book is just the unexplainable pushes of Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Yuta. The match was... I don't know. Again, dude, just one of those deals where I watched it and really didn't take all that much away from it. I had to use the bathroom during it too. That didn't help. The fuck you Sammy chants didn't go unnoticed. Certainly made the finish that much funnier, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I spend most of the match trying to come up with a way to explain my thoughts on Bryan Danielson right now. He's just... I don't know, dude. Maybe I'm the only one that notices, but the guy just looks like he's going through the motions at this point. Like, he's there to pick up a paycheck, and that's about it. Whatever juice Danielson had behind his matches earlier this year, or even late last year when he was having those fantastic TV matches all the time, going out there and tearing down the house night in and night out, that steam is completely worn off for me now. And I think the same can be said for him, too. Because he does not look like a guy that gives two fucks about what he's doing right now. On the one hand, I can't blame him. He's been booked like absolute dreck since the beginning of the year through no fault of his own. They missed their window on putting the world title on him when he was the hottest thing in the company. Now he's just a dude. And that's what he was in this match. He was a dude in a match with three other dudes where he wasn't even factored into the finish. Just a total nothing burger for the entire match, and the most notable thing he was involved with here was getting put through the timekeeper's table at ringside. After being dropped on the table initially rib first, and the table not breaking, and then Jericho gave him a suplex through it, and Danielson just kind of laid there for the rest of the match. Probably thinking to himself, what the fuck am I doing with my life right now? And then at the end, they had Garcia put Sammy in a sharpshooter, only for Jericho to come in from out of nowhere and clock Garcia with the Ring of Honor title. Also, Sammy could be the one to get the pin for his team. Yeah. After all that crap he's caused Tony in the last several days, apparently they are rewarding the guy with giving him a TV win. That'll teach him a lesson. We wonder why no one takes Tony Khan seriously as a promoter or person. By the way, I would also like for someone to explain the logic of a Garcia pulling Guevara toward the ring ropes when he was in the sharpshooter, making himself prone for Jericho to conveniently hit Garcia with a gimmick on the floor, instead of just staying in the middle of the ring where he would have been perfectly protected. Just asking. Just a totally useless main event. Did nothing for anyone involved, including the guy they had get the win. Like I said, when I was watching, the match really put into perspective just how much wasted potential Bryan Danielson is. They've totally butchered his push in AEW. I just don't care about him anymore. He's not booked like he matters. All he does is lose anymore. He's definitely not involved with anything meaningful right now. He's just a cog in the wheel, playing second fiddle to Chris Jericho in his never-ending mission to become AEW's modern-day Jeff Jarrett. And I know what I said. Kind of gotten away from it in recent times, but he's Chris Jericho for a reason. And you can especially see it with the way the guy's being forced down everyone's throat week in and week out on TV right now. You know that guy is calling his own shots, especially from a booking standpoint. Unbelievable. I don't know what's going on with AEW right now, but this plateau they've hit from the fallout from All Out, it's really concerning. From a company morale standpoint, from a booking standpoint, fan intrigue standpoint, AEW is completely flatlined. There's no buzz for this product. The shows are boring as all get out. The wrong people are constantly being spotlighted while the ones people actually want to see are only being sporadically featured. I don't know what's going on, but something's got to change. Because this show even had MJF wrestling on it, and I still didn't think highly of it when it was over. You know, the one thing I actually at least credited AEW for, regardless of how bad the booking was that the shows were generally never boring. But these last few weeks have been exactly that. Lifeless, meaningless, boring wrestling shows featuring people I could not possibly give a crap about. Danny Garcia and Flat Wheel Yuta. Those are the people Tony Khan sees star potential in. Over guys like Ricky Starks, Powerhouse Hobbs, Claudio, FTR. List goes on and on, man. And as long as Tony continues to insist on trying to run everything by himself, these problems are continuing to persist. All those legends, all those great minds, all those former big names he's got locked under contract right now working for him, the ones that understand the business and know how this shit is supposed to work. Tony has all those references and all those sources at his disposal. And he continues to insist on trying to run the ship single-handedly every week. And we see the results. Because that ship continues to sink and sink and sink. All right, so let's move on to this NWA World Championship Wrestling program. It's always weird when we come across these short episodes because I almost get the sense of why are we even bothering to talk about it? The runtime for this show was approximately 32 minutes and some change. And I actually spent some time trying to research why the episode was so short to begin with. I mean, we've had a series of 45-minute episodes that we reviewed, but 30 minutes... I don't know, it's almost like, why bother? Not why bother review it, but why bother even airing a show? It's not to say it was bad or anything. They packed a lot of stuff into the program. The six-man tag on this show is a lot of fun, but there really wasn't a whole lot to talk about in general with this one. They open with Ole and Arn at the booth to do a promo. You know, Arn's talking about how when he first showed up to team with The Rock, people were already underestimating him from the beginning. And for the record, The Rock was Ole's moniker. We're not talking about Dwayne Johnson. Give that one another decade. But, you know, Arn's saying that the people tried to belittle him because he was young and inexperienced, but it was because of the great men with whom he surrounded himself that he was able to become the man he is today. Says that the Horseman is more than just a collection of great talent. It is a state of mind. There was a part in here where he took a shot at Magnum TA, and at the time Arn was initially talking about Magnum, there was a big studio pop in the middle of his promo. Turns out that it was Magnum coming out for his scheduled match. Because, you know, that's what happens when you're over like God, like Magnum was around this point. Anyway, the Andersons pretty much said that they were coming for the Rock and Roll Express and the World Tag titles. also vowed that they would end Dusty's career by the end of '86. So then we went immediately to the ring for a Magnum Squash. He beat Vernon Deaton with a belly-to-belly in about 15 seconds. And of course, David Crockett also shat himself, calling the spot like normal. And then we immediately went back to the booth for a Paul Jones Baron von Raschko promo. I immediately braced myself for the incoming train wreck, especially after last week's dumpster fire of a Paul Jones segment where he basically stood out there with dick in hand, having no clue what he wanted to say prior to coming out. Here I'll give him credit. He at least had some material in mind. He talked about Manny Fernandez not accepting his offer to join the Army, but he knows Manny will take the bait eventually because he needs to make the right decision. Also mentioned something about how people are asking how he managed to bring in Rick Rude to the NWA, to which, well, he never actually explained anything. He glossed right over that statement and proceeded with the rest of the promo. He eventually passed the mic to Baron, and all he did was talk about how the Army is a cohesive unit thanks to the genius of Air Paul Jones. He also had a great moment here where he talked about how Paul had promised Baron a shot at the title, and there's a pause, and Baron peers to his right in deep thought, and then he fires back with, World Television title. Yes, it would appear that Baron completely forgot what belt he was pursuing. Classic. So that was that. I probably could have just summed it up as they said a bunch of shit for 2 minutes, because you really didn't miss anything there. Thank God we had the Boogie Woogie Man to save the day. And it's story time with handsome Jimmy Valiant here and Tony Schiavone. By the way, Jimmy is also growing his hair back out. He now has a crew cut. So he is already making more progress than Kurt Angle ever did after shaving his head. He said that last week he was in Missouri wrestling, and while he was mid-match, he looked up into the balcony of the arena and saw Dolly Partons. Plural, by the way. And it was at that moment where Valiant decided that he needed to stop everything he was doing so that he could bring Dolly Partons down to ringside, presumably to fuck right then and there on the spot. I'm not kidding, that is essentially what Valiant was saying here. So Valiant knocked his opponent out, and he allegedly climbed levels upon levels of this building to rescue Dolly Partons or whatever. I guess it's the classic saving the princess from the dreaded locked door at the top of the castle or whatever. Only to come to find out that it was not Dolly Partons after all. It was two bald-headed geeks sitting real close to one another. Yeah, that was the punchline. And as soon as he dropped that, he walked away. This was met with complete silence, and Tony Schiavone with the perfect pitch. All right then, let's go back to the ring. This would still be the best promo segment if they did it in 2022, no doubt. So then we had the Raging Bull versus Mike Simani, with David Crockett walking back in laughing at Schiavone here. I believe he said, "Oh, he got you." Anyway, they wrestled for approximately 1 minute, wherein 45 seconds of that minute was the production team trying to fuck around with David's malfunctioning mic, and then Bull won with the flying burrito. Then we cut back to the booth with Buddy Landel and Bill Dundee, wherein Dundee informed us that the hottest movie in 1986 was a family-made film entitled Crocodile Dundee. Then he began to call out, of all people on this show, Sam Houston, which he used as a setup to pass the mic to Buddy Landel, saying that he better eat, sleep, and breathe wrestling, elsewise he's going to run into some problems when the real Nature Boy gets his hands on him. To which I then asked, this is what they brought Buddy Landel back for in the year 1986? to have him feud with Sam fucking Houston, of all people. Geez, I thought Buddy would have had higher standards at this stage of his career. And for the record, Buddy had pretty much nothing to add in this entire promo. Literally just talked about receiving fan mail. But here was an interesting sighting. Tim Horner. The legendary Tim Horner of Smoky Mountain fame. Of course, he had gotten his start in Crockett Promotions a year or two prior here. Actually, the first time I even saw a Tim Horner match was probably when he was being used in Mid-South as a TV jobber for a period of time. Guy was a fine athlete. You know, I've heard Jim Cornette's classic burial rants on him from doing business with him in Smoky Mountain. Apparently the guy was a real piece of work. Go check out those YouTube pieces if you have some free time too. They're pretty great rants. Anyway, he wrestled Randy Mulkey here. I didn't note this too. I think Earl Hebner was reffing for this entire program. This might have been the first appearance from him on the Superstation, at least from what I remember. I feel like I would remember if I saw Earl Hebner calling ring action. Most of the time it's Pee Wee Anderson. Like I noted, Horner was always a good worker from everything I ever saw from him. Yeah, I never really viewed him as anything beyond that, which I think is probably why he kind of ran into some trouble during the latter stages of his career. Kind of that overflated ego syndrome where you think you should be pushed higher up on the card when the reality is you're nowhere near a main event type talent. One may call him a B-plus player. But, even watching Horner in this match, it's like, yeah, he could do all the basics. His shit looked good. But, facially, the guy was as boring to watch as Daniel Garcia is every week. Everything he did here was just moves. He took Randy to the ground and wrestled. Then he picked him up and gave him a body slam. Then he picked him back up, shot him into the ropes, hit him with a power slam. Then he picked him up one more time, did a really nice bridging pin at the end. But that's all it was. It was hit a move, pick the guy up, shoot him off. Hit him with another move, pick the guy up, shoot him off, rinse, repeat. And the crowd watched. None of them really reacted to anything, and when it was over, golf claps at best. Again, it's not to shit on the guy. I know Corny has his problems with him, but Tim Horner was always one of those dudes, when I saw him, it just read serviceable mid-carder. Maybe I'm kind of being harsh on the guy, but never really viewed him as anything beyond that. Fine squash, though. So we come back from break, and Tony Schiavone welcomes to the booth Solo Robert Gibson. And I immediately said, oh no. And, well, stop me if you've heard this before, but Gibson spoke. He muttered some words under his breath. I could pick up on virtually nothing that was said. And then using his quick wit, he called over Tim Horner and said, here, buddy, you take a crack at it. And Gibson not just left the booth, but he stormed from the booth. Looked like Joe Biden trying to avoid having to answer questions from the press after his speech. He got the fuck out of Dodge. Good for him. And Tim Horner came in. He stood there kind of awkwardly, and he said he's happy to be back in Crockett Promotions. We needed this segment on the show. Why exactly? To fill time, apparently. So then we went to the ring for a Horseman beatdown session. It is Ole, Arn, and Tully taking on 3 job guys, 2 of which I believe were Bill Tab and Rocky Kernodle. The other one, I have no idea. Doesn't matter. But they just wiped the floor with these jabronis. Lots of constant tags in and out. And the finish was Arn and Tully hitting a double gourd buster for the 3. And these men had a look on their face of absolute confidence and contentment having demolished these men. It's always great when you have brash, arrogant heels propping themselves up after beating complete waste of human plasma like a lot of these 1980 jobbers. After the break, we had a pretty short little Dusty promo. Basically said that he was going to take out Ole and the rest of the Horsemen before they can get to him. And they had a great pitch back to the ring here because while Dusty was talking, he stops mid-promo and begins jaw-jacking with people off camera, saying, "Who you calling sucker?" And at first, I thought it was a heckler in the crowd that was giving Dusty a hard time because Dusty had a tendency to do that back in the day where he would just go off on people. Turns out it was Shaska Whatley and Baron von Raschke. And as soon as I heard Dusty calling out Shaska in the ring, my immediate thought was, oh, please let them air a house show match with those two at some point. If they actually book that, God, sounds like a good time. Anyway, speaking of the Baron and Shaska, they wrestled Bill Mulkey and Lee Peak. Shaska was still out there with the bald head. Literally looked like Mr. Potato Head. He shouted a lot of racial obscenities while Baron acted all wacky and got blown up in like a minute. And Shaska ended up getting the win with the second rope superplex. Yeah, I have virtually nothing to add to most of these matches, if you already have not been able to tell. Coming back from the break, though, we had Jim Cornette out for a promo, holding in his hand a front-page article from the Chicago paper regarding Animal and Hawk, allegedly, saying that both men were arrested for street crimes, including his signature line that one of them were stealing old women's purses. I also snickered at his line regarding Paul Ellering, saying that he was hit by a rainbow bread truck while waiting on the unemployment line. And for anyone that listens to Corny's podcast every week, the rainbow bread truck line gets thrown out there on occasion, so I pop for that. Beyond that, though, he took a minute to put over his boys and set them up for the ring introductions. They wrestled Randy Barber and Keith Patterson, and immediately from the gate, Tony and David take note of Cornette coming over to join them at the booth. So after all these months of Midnight Express matches on the Superstation, Tony Schiavone has finally come up with the ultimate plot to make sure that Corny does not get a word in edgewise. In that plan, they're going to constantly talk so that Corny does not have a chance to interject at any point. Yeah, you'll be shocked to know this plan failed. We did have a moment here where David cut off one of Corny's jokes on Randy Barber, which I was very disappointed by. I wanted to hear Corny bury the job, guys. But Midnight's win with the rocket launcher. Then we cut to Ric Flair for a promo, letting us know that guys like Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey do not grow on trees because they're world-class champions. Word. And the closest thing we have to them in 2022 is FTR, and you never know it by the fact that we rarely, if ever, see them on TV in a given week. I mean, Lord knows they ever wrestle. And beyond him going out there to put over the National Wrestling Alliance, that's all there really was to take away from this. He just said that to wrestle the world champion, you have to be a dude. And to be part of the National Wrestling Alliance, you've also got to be a dude. And that immediately led me to have to include this bit of audio for all you 90s kids out there.
I'm a dick. He's a dick. She's a dick. Cause we're all dicks. Hey, I'm a dick. He's a dick. She's a dick. Cause we're all dicks.
There. Had to do it. Speaking of dudes, Magnum TA was a dude. He was a fucking dude. He was the man, in fact. And he's out there to call out Jimmy Garvin to task. Says he's been ducking and dodging him every week and sending Precious to yap and yell about what Garvin is going to do to him. So maybe Garvin ought to grow a pair and get in the ring with Magnum so they can settle the score. Because Magnum's a busy man, you see. He's got other things he's trying to attend to. So then we cut to the ring for a Garvin match. It was Ron Garvin, however. Ron Garvin. He beat some guy named Gary Royal, who I can neither confirm nor deny has any familial ties to Nelson Royal. My guess would be no, considering Ronnie literally killed the guy in about 20 seconds with a knockout punch. Nelson Royal was at least a semi-competent worker. But we did get a sighting of Jim Garvin before the show was over, and he was raking Magnum over the coals for allegedly putting his hands on Precious, which seemed like groundbreaking news at the time. Maybe Magnum would like to argue that claim. But Garvin's out there saying Magnum should be jailed and prosecuted for what he did, as if he wasn't hugged enough as a kid by his mommy or daddy. And right at the end here, he says that Dusty may be filling Magnum's head with a lot of garbage, but Garvin promises to drain his tanks. Whatever that infers, I have no idea. And that was the show. Yeah, like I said at the top, really not a whole lot to say about this one. It was a show. Like I said, they packed a lot of stuff into a 30-minute program, but I don't know, it's one of those episodes where you watch it, and when it's over, you're like, all right, on to the next one. I think the one thing that stood out to me the most is how fast we're coming up on Magnum TA's accident. You know, it all comes right the fuck out of nowhere, too, so when it happens, it's going to totally shift the direction of everything they're building towards for Starrcade. I don't remember how they covered it on the Superstation, but I guess we'll see when we get there. It's not something I'm particularly looking forward to talk about because it's so sad, but we got to talk about it eventually, right? But why don't we go ahead and move on to some better news. World Class Championship Wrestling from October 8th, 1983. A little bit more going on here than last week, which was mostly just a recap show, at least for the first half hour. But we opened with Buddy Roberts and Johnny Mantell. And the first thing I wrote down here, oh dear Lord, what the fuck is on Buddy's head? How does one even comment? So, well, remember back when they first did the shaving angle with Buddy? And I was talking about how it was going to be a pretty phenomenal moment when they paid it off on TV by having Buddy reveal his bald head to the crowd. You're, waiting for the big reveal when the babyface humiliates him on television and rips the wig off. Well, they just revealed it right here. Completely random with no explanation. Not only has Buddy done away with the signature headgear, but he just randomly decides here to take the wig off after the opening bell. That was their big angle to reveal Buddy Roberts with a shaved head in World Class. Just removing the wig totally at random with no rhyme or reason. Quite underwhelming. Now granted, the reveal of the bald head was pretty great. Buddy standing there yelling at Bronco to tell the fans to shut up and quit laughing at him. I'm actually trying to think who he reminded me of. Buddy Roberts with a totally bald, shiny head. I don't know. It's like Baron Von Raschke meets King Kong Bundy post-liposuction. I have no other way to describe it. I mean, the match was almost an afterthought when you realize this is the first televised appearance of Buddy revealing his exposed bald head. I mean, I spend most of the time laughing anytime they did a close-up on Buddy. I completely forgot to note much about the match. Buddy took a nasty spill out to the floor early on where he landed right on his tailbone. That looked no fun. Other than that, it was, pretty basic stuff until the finish. Most of the match, not even kidding, was Mantell holding Buddy in a series of headlocks. I think there was a point here where Mantell had Buddy on the mat in a reverse headlock, And Mercer described the image of Buddy's bald head underneath Mantell's arm as looking like a large cantaloupe. I popped at that line. Eventually Buddy took over and worked over Mantell's left knee. They ended up working the match down to the wire. Buddy went up for a splash and missed. Mantell did something resembling a sling blade off the ropes to Buddy, even though Mercer called it a clothesline. And Mantell kept firing back with a series of offense on Buddy, ended up locking him with the abdominal stretch right before the time limit draw. And before they cut away, Buddy made sure to put the wig back on and admonished the crowd. But that was that. Like I said, really kind of disappointing payoff to the Buddy bald head story. I expected this big angle where, one of the baby faces would rip the wig off on television for the first time and the people would go nuts for it. But instead, they just had Buddy take the wig off right here, and that was pretty much that. So then we went to a quick Iceman squash. Wrestled Bill Ratke here, who, yes, is still apparently a cowboy in some parallel universe. He still looks like every fat, out-of-shape 1980s job guy, but sure, we'll throw the cowboy gimmick in there. And Mercer confirmed this here with the following statement, and I wrote this down verbatim because I thought it was funny. Bill Ratke may be a home on the range, but it looks like he's eaten most of it. 5-star line. The subtle things Bill Mercer said on this program. Very underrated ring announcer. So anyway, this is a weird match. They do a deal where Ratke pretty much jump attacks Iceman at the beginning, and they wrestle for a couple minutes until they do a spot where the Iceman ends up giving Ratke a headbutt to the jaw. And at first, I thought the match was being thrown out because Mark Lorenz rang the bell at the timekeeper's table, but then they just keep wrestling. So I don't know what was going on there. Somebody screwed up. But they pretty much had the Iceman fighting from underneath until the finish. Parsons went through his little wacky jab and jive dance, as I refer to it as. Shaking his hips, throw a left jab. Wiggle in the booty, throw another left jab. And finally at the end, Iceman whipped Ratke off the ropes and hit him with the butt for the 3. So yes, for the record, Cowboy Bill Ratke. Still a meaningless jobber despite the cowboy moniker. How unfortunate. After that, we had the Mongol and Boris Zherkov of Devastation Incorporated versus Gentleman Chris Adams and David Von Erich. Talk about diversity and representation here in 1983. Check out this cast of characters. A Mongolian, a fake Russian, an Englishman, and a redneck American cowboy. Who says you need anti-racism training? Man, World Class had that shit figured out in the mid-'80s. Pretty good match. Some fun action here. And by fun action, I mean it was entirely carried by Chris Adams and David Von Erich. I appreciated the competent officiating from the ref assigned to this match, specifically during the spot where Adams was working over Zherkov in an arm wrench, and when Zherkov went to reach out to tag Mongol, Mongol was clearly leaning over the top rope. So, of course, this was an illegal tag, and the ref admonished him for it and said, "Fuck no, son. Get back on the ring apron." Now, if this were 2022, the ref would have just stood there with dick in hand and let it happen. And finally, at the point Mongol actually tagged in, David was a legal guy for his team, and Mongol stood on the apron and went, "Maybe not." Good attention to detail from last week's show, too. I almost forgot about this until I wrote it down. If you remember on last week's show, David and Mongol had a TV match where David had the iron claw locked in on Mongol for a good 2 minutes, and when he released the grip, Mongol had done the blade job to the forehead to signify the vice grip that David had applied to him before the submission. So for this week, Mongol painted a little red bruise mark on his forehead to sell the effects of the claw. Granted, it looked a little corny, but appreciating the small details. By the way, I captured an audio clip during this match that I want you all to interpret. I'm not going to imply anything that was said. I'm not going to rush to judgment here. But Bill Mercer said something here that I want you all to try and analyze. And you let me know what you heard in the comment section.
And the Mongol wants just to beat off David Von Erich.
Again, I'm not going to imply anything. I'm just going to let that one hang in the open. And you can all let me know what you heard, or what you think you heard. So eventually they got to the heat spot, and they shot some deals where one of the heels would keep running interference so the ref couldn't see the other heel choking or raking one of the baby faces. We had another unusual Bill Mercer moment here, where he directed our attention to the back of Boris Zurkov's head while he had a bear hug applied on David, to which I said, yes, Boris Zurkov appears to be bald. I failed to see the point of this comment. And looking back, I don't think Mercer had a clue what he was referring to either. But eventually, Adams got the hot tag at the end and ran wild, wherein as soon as he made the tag to make the comeback on Zurkov, they managed to fuck up the very first spot. Adams goes to Irish whip Zurkov into the corner buckle, and as he runs to try and hit it with a clothesline attack, Zurkov decided to take a phantom bump instead, while Chris Adams had to stop and look at him like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? And eventually it broke down with all four guys. I believe the ref threw the match out as a disqualification, although I'm not exactly sure how. They were doing four-way spots at one point, and the bell just randomly rang. I had figured it was a double DQ, but after David put the claw on Skandar Ogbar and sent the heels packing, Lorenz announced that David and Adams were the winners. So, yeah, no idea what happened here. I'm not entirely sure anyone else did either, but yay, babyfaces win. When in doubt, put the good guys over. It's always a safe bet, especially in front of the Dallas faithful. And they follow this with a pretty goofy pre-tape in the back with Mercer interviewing Skandar Ogbar. Apparently in the showers of all places. Mercer decided, you know what would be a perfect place to interview this guy? Surrounded by naked dudes with their dicks hanging out. Put a sticky on that in a minute. Anyway, the whole premise here was Ogbar saying that Devastation Inc. is not through with the Von Erichs yet, and Ogbar is going to make it a mission to get the Claw banned in world class. Also said it's time to break out the hired guns. In this case, we're talking Kamala. So I presume he'll be back on television soon. And, well, they added a touch of comedy here at the end as they were filming this in the showers. So naturally, one of the boys is taking a shower mid-promo. I think it was Bill Ratke, although don't quote me on it. So he comes out and says, "Can you guys conduct this interview somewhere else? I'm trying to shower." And they stood there dumbfounded with the classic Vince McMahon pre-tape model where they hold the frame for about 10 seconds of awkward silence, and then they finally cut away. Fantastic. Then we got our main event for the week. Terry Gordy versus Kerry Von Erich. Terry and Kerry. I'll do my best to keep everyone's names straight. No promises. was a very fun match, though. They had a good old-fashioned slugfest. Some great back-and-forth, hard-hitting punches. They really laid in and beat the shit out of one another here. Looked more realistic than anything I ever see on AEW with all those fake forearms everyone does. Seriously, if you want a good model for what your average, everyday bar fight looks like, this wouldn't be a bad one. Mercer spent some time in this match revisiting the Jimmy Garvin story, which is still ongoing at the moment. We were told last week that he is bringing in a special assistant for Sunshine, and I believe he said here we'll get more clarification next week, so stay posted for that. Anyhow, they eventually built to the spot here where Gordy got the Oriental Spike locked in on Kerry on the apron, ended up dragging him back into the ring and leaving him prone on the mat. And they had a really good finish here. A fucked DQ finish that actually made logical sense, because they went through a couple periods where Gordy could have easily finished Kerry off, but he kept pulling his shoulders off the mat before the 3. So finally, David gets sick of Gordy's BS, and he runs out and locks in the claw on Gordy to force him to break the spike hold on Kerry. And of course, the story at this point is David making the save for his brother because Gordy was being a dick and trying to legitimately hurt Kerry. But again, the main point here is they're getting over that spike as a devastating hold. And I believe in story now, this would be the second of the Von Erich brothers that Gordy has managed to put the Oriental Spike on. We got David and Kerry. And that was pretty much that final segment. Very good show overall. Some great fun ring action. Lots of variety on the show. And they're pushing several big story angles forward. We also got some classic Bill Mercer lines here. And he's always a source of comedy. Dry humor, as we might put it. But I always appreciate that. We also learned a valuable lesson on this episode. Do not conduct interviews when people are naked and exposed in the showers. You might get admonished for it. And until next week, where we learn who Jimmy Garvin is bringing in as Sunshine's personal assistant, let the melodrama begin. If there is one thing I've come to learn as an over-the-hill millennial, women do not get along with one another in the workforce. Ever. I'm sure there will be much drama, much yelling, and much pain, blues, and agony ahead of us. But we will see. Anyhow, kind of a low-key retro review part of the Friday podcast this week. But that is all right. Until then, thanks for stopping in for this one. Make sure you come back and check out the upcoming Monday show. We are going to be reviewing WWE's Extreme Rules Premium Live Special, which airs on Saturday. Hopefully I remember that. In the meantime, here's what we're going to do with SmackDown. Since it'll technically be the go-home show for the live special that we're already going to be reviewing on the Monday show anyway, the SmackDown report will probably be shorter than usual. Obviously, I do want to check out the Gunther-Sheamus IC title match, but, if there's an angle or something pertaining to the Extreme Rules show that'll already be redundant by the time we get to Monday, I probably won't spend too much time harping on it. If it's something that doesn't pertain to the event, I'll spend more time running it down. But just to save time, because the pay-per-view review will probably take a little bit of time. Because we also have the Retro Raw show in addition. So it'll be a pretty packed Monday show. I don't expect it to be a 2-hour ordeal or anything like that. But there will be a decent amount of material to cover. So I want to give myself enough time to get through everything. But make sure you stop back on Monday to hear my thoughts on all that. And until then, take care all. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Wear a condom. And let's go, Brandon. Peace out.